Canadian filmmaker Adam Egoyan has made 7 feature films, including Exotica, 1994. It is his latest, The Sweet Hereafter, that is winning him great acclaim. Janet Maslin named it one of the top 10 films of 1997, calling it mournfully beautiful and unexpectedly transcendent. The film is an adaptation of the Russell Banks book about the effect a terrible school bus accident has on a rural town. I'm pleased to have Adam Egoyan join us now for a consideration of this film, as it is listed in many top 10 lists, including, as he got on the plane and picked up the New York Times for today, Stephen Holden calling it his favorite film of 1997, saying, among us, some other things that we will talk about in just a moment. Welcome to the broadcast.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. You were on the plane and you picked this up.
Yes.
What a day.
No, it was
How to
great.
make a flight.
I thought, what better way to come to New York than to have that sort of news? It was wonderful.
Are you surprised at the reaction to it?
What I'm surprised by is that people are able to understand the spirit of the film and be so transfixed by that. And because the language is quite... it's not really a traditional way of telling the story, but because the emotional core is so deep, people are able to identify and be tremendously moved by it. I'm so gratified because that's how I felt when I read the book, and it was very important for me to preserve the spirit of the book.
For the benefit of the audience who hasn't seen it, tell us how you tell the story in terms of leaping forward and leaping back.
Sure. It's about a small rural community, and they're suffering from this terrible accident that takes away their children. And it's about a lawyer who comes into the town and goes from home to home trying to stir up a class suit litigation. And he's sure that he can assign blame for this accident. He's sure that he can find out, and he knows who is responsible. And his whole case is hinged on the testimony of the sole survivor, this young woman. And she, for her own reasons, dismantles his case, effectively, and in the process finds her own dignity and is able to heal some of the wounds that have affected this town in the process. So it's about how we need to find blame, but ultimately, and assign blame, and how we have to find answers from within, where we have to search, and where we're able to find a process of healing, where that begins. But it's about what happens when you're in the midst of an accident like this. So the structure of the film is very much going in the future, in the past, in the present.
Right.
People are adrift. People are trying to find some meaning. And the structure of the film reflects that and tries to find a language which reflects the psyche of this community.
Let me talk a little bit about casting. One of my favorite actors, Ian Holm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I assume that was just obvious for you.
It was really obvious because I think he's one of the finest actors in the English language. I needed a brilliant actor who could convey. He's an ambulance chaser, but he's more than that. He does believe in what he says.
And he has personal reasons to invest in it.
He has personal reasons because of the failure of his own relationship with his daughter, the sense that his daughter, who's a drug addict, who communicates, by calling him periodically on the phone and asking for more money, he's tortured by this. And the only way that he could somehow give himself a sense of healing is by going into these homes and explaining to these bereaved parents why they've lost their children and what he can do to make sure it never happens again. But of course, at the back of his mind is, why has this happened to him? Why does he have to suffer what he's suffering? And it's a story of human suffering, but also about people being able to transcend that and find a route outside of this. And it's full of contradictions, and that's what I look for in a story.
That's what I was going to say. As you describe this, there are many people who would step forward to say, these are the themes and the ideas that attract you the most.
Right. Yes. These are... I'm fascinated by the process of loss. What do you do when you lose something that you need emotionally? How do you reconstruct that? What rituals, what obsessions begin to take over the mind that is in need of something that it doesn't have access to? And that's something that's permeated a lot of my work. And I think cinema is a great way of dealing with these themes, since it's so much about that. The moment you take an image, you're acknowledging that the moment has passed. And so much of film is dealing with nostalgia and the idea of sentiment. And so to me, there is a correlation between the themes I'm fascinated by, but also the medium I've chosen to reveal and explore those themes.
Okay, this is our first tape. This is Ian Holm, the lawyer who's representing some of the families of the children, and he visits the Ottos, Ms. Ottos, played by your wife, and he's there to persuade them to let them represent him. Take a look at this excerpt.
I will sue for negligence until they bleed.
I want the person to go to jail.
The actress Arsene Kanjian, am I
That's
saying
right.
that correctly?
She should get a reward for that. That's great.
You've been married, what, 4 or 5 years?
Oh, no. We've been together for 14 years.
Children?
Yeah. Yes, we have a young son who's just recovering from chickenpox, actually. So he's 4 years old.
Where's home?
Toronto.
Your parents came from Egypt?
Yes, I was born in Egypt. Arsene was born in Beirut. We're of Armenian descent, and we met in Toronto 14 years ago. I came when I was very young. I was 3 years old when my family moved to Canada, and she was 17.
This was shot in British Columbia?
This was shot in British Columbia and Ontario. All the exterior shots are shot in the Rockies, and all the studio stuff was shot in Toronto.
How much did you change the novel?
Well, the novel is changed in the spirit of the book is preserved, or hopefully preserved. I mean, but what we had to change was that in Canada, I suppose, when an accident like that happens, we're not as litigious a society as the United States is, and so in the book there's a flock of lawyers that descends on this town, and there's a competition between them, and there's a whole community that inhabits this town, which I decided to pare down, and so Mitchell is the only lawyer that what we find. But to me, what's beautiful about the book is that it has the quality of a fable, and to preserve that, I introduced another fable, Robert Browning's The Pied Piper of Hamelin, and that's not in the book, but I think by weaving that in, I'm able to better underline some of the feelings I had. Russell we had a conversation about this the other day, and he said it's interesting because it's almost too literary a device to put into the novel, but it works, I think, very well in the film. And it was a risk, but I think it works. What happens is that the young survivor is a babysitter for a number of the children in the community, and we have a scene where she is reading The Pied Piper, and then later on, the poem and the themes of annihilation, of reward, of punishment, they all come back to inform what happens in the story, of course, as Mitchell descends on the town. And so it has a wonderful echo through the story, and it serves as a controlling metaphor for the piece.
Is Russell happy?
Russell is really happy, and I think I would have been miserable if he wasn't. It was the first time I'd done an adaptation.
So you were nervous when you showed him the film?
Oh, I've never been as nervous as when I actually sent him the first draft of the screenplay, because I think what happens, and I can understand why it needs to happen in a lot of films, the writer is kept apart, but I really wanted him to be pleased with this. He's a huge film buff, and I wanted him to be involved, and actually one of the reasons I think he let me have the option was that he felt that he would be involved, and I wanted to honor not only the spirit of the book, but also the spirit of Russell himself. He's a very generous person.
You involved him while you were writing the screenplay
Well,
in terms of saying, I'm thinking this?
Yes. For instance, with when The Pied Piper came up, I ran this idea by him, and he wasn't sure at first, but I think when he actually was able to read it, again, we didn't have a contractual, I didn't need to have his approval, but I needed to artistically. I had to feel that he believed that I was respectful of what the book dealt with, because it's a work of great personal. He has invested so much in the book, and I couldn't disregard that, and I needed to have his support, and it's something that I would always seek, I think, if I'm doing an adaptation.
The initial power of the book for you was about emotion.
Yes.
And repression of emotion.
Yes.
And also the fable quality it had.
But also this job, the Ian Holm's job, the type of man who has found a way of dealing with a very dark personal neurosis and obsession through something that society can acknowledge and actually honor. I mean, I think what a lawyer does is create a narrative. A good lawyer is able to tell a better story than the opposing lawyer. So it's all about narrative. It's all about how we come up with a story that other people want to believe. And what I found most moving about the book is that at a certain point, his narrative is displaced by this young woman who, for her own personal reasons, has to assert something which comes as a surprise to her. She doesn't know when she's giving that deposition that she will...
She's creating her own narrative.
Yes, I want to say that she's lying, but I'm giving away some of the story. But she, at that point, it dawns on her that by dismantling his case, she's able to empower herself. And that was such a stunning moment in the book that I felt it was a great piece of drama.
Take a look at this. This is a second clip in which Stevens runs into Billy Ansell, played by Bruce Greenwood, who's a parent, as I said, who lost 2 children in the crash, and it's against...
And doesn't want to believe in
it's against the lawsuit that
That's right.
Stevens is pursuing. Roll tape. Here is that clip.
It's important that we initiate proceedings right away. Things get covered up. People lie.
Now, let me just go back to Stephen Holden, because we live in a digital world. For pluses, there are minuses, as you know, from your admiration for video technology. For audiences who like action, The Sweet Hereafter may be too somber and cerebral. The film, unlike the book, ends too abruptly and leaves questions hanging about one of the key characters that the novel answers. You say?
I say he's probably right. There is that question of Dolores. When Nicole gives her story, she basically makes the driver of the bus responsible. And it is a very problematic choice because she's a very sympathetic character in the film. But I did believe that a young girl in that situation who's very absorbed and very concerned with herself would probably not think of what the consequences of that action might be. And we did shoot a scene where we understood that Dolores has moved on, but the thing is, I couldn't. The book ends completely differently. There's a tremendous demolition derby. The town, the community comes and watches cars being crashed in a very sort of ritualized way, and it's a very cathartic moment. But it had no place in this film adaptation. And it was painful because when I read the book, that was the first thing that made me want to do the adaptation was that scene. I thought, well, this cries out to be filmed. But it was also one of the first things I let go, which also made the process of giving the script to Russell all that more worrisome, because one of the ways I convinced him into letting me have the option was talking about that last scene, which didn't make it into the first draft.
Yeah. A couple of things. One, we talked about music and loving opera. Where does that come from, and is that something you have evolved into, or has music been with you for a long time?
I studied music. My sister is a pianist, and I studied classical guitar. And but the idea, I've always been attracted to 20th century opera, Wojciech and Lulu. I mean, I think Alban Berg is really one of my heroes. But I wasn't in love with opera until I actually got into that world, and I realized that there is nothing better than a great dramatic text and great music combined. It's you when it works, you almost have to pinch yourself.
Do you want to make a musical?
No, probably not. I think it's something that I think there are other people who would do that much better, but right now I'm having a lot of fun with it. Salome was a great experience. It might actually be the best opera for me, because it's really about people watching other people and obsession and about what happens when a gaze is not returned. Yeah. So it ended up being right up my alley, but there's 2 new operas that I'm doing. One is a libretto that I've written myself, and the other one is I'm going to London to work on an adaptation of a Jules Verne short story that's been reconfigured into an opera for the English National.
So here you are, from Egypt, Armenian descent, come to British Columbia, began making films. Exotica 1994 attracted some attention. There was a film that you were going to make that didn't make. What was it called? Dead Action or something?
Yeah, Dead Sleep. That was a Warner Brothers thriller after Exotica.
Yeah. What happened to that?
Well, it was the classic story. It just, at a certain point, I realized that there were casting disagreements and that it was just going to go on and on and on. And meanwhile, the clock was ticking on my option on Russell's book, and I had to leave the project. Otherwise, I would have lost the option on Sweet Hereafter, which I had promised myself I would not let slip through my fingers.
You had to do it.
I had to do it.
You're going to do a film, Felicia's Journey, which is Mel Gibson's production company?
Yes, which is a William Trevor novel, and he's a great writer, and it's an extraordinary novel, and I'm in the midst of working on that.
You again will write the screenplay?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For everything you direct, you want to write the screenplay?
I think a lot of what I do as a director starts with what I do as a writer. I mean, I think that my style is very much based on how I structure the storytelling. So if I'm not involved with that, and that was one of the other problems with Dead Sleep, was that it was a script that I tried to make my own, but it came from somewhere else. And I think that ultimately that was frustrating. So if I can find stories which would be well served by my style, then that's what I'll always gravitate towards.
Characterize the style for me.
The style is something where time is quite fluid. I think that cinema is about how we structure time.
Right.
When you shoot a scene, you are recording a moment in time. But I'm of the belief that you can. I have no problem watching linear stories, but I think that you can really get into the psyche of a piece by understanding the character's relationship to time, and then finding a way of using the structure of filmmaking to explore that and to get into their subconscious. The way filmmaking is like dreaming, I find, and the way in our dreams we are able to move back and forth in time effortlessly is something that I feel I want to evolve in the films I'm making. And what's gratifying about Sweet Hereafter, I mean, all my films have used that, but in Exotica, many people were confused and couldn't situate themselves. But with Sweet Hereafter, I mean, people have no problem with time. Even though there are 35 different time frames in the film, because the emotions are so rooted, and because the central event is so firmly etched and so anticipated, you have a great freedom to really move into these people's past, their present, into their future, and it becomes a study of tenses. It almost becomes like using, these various time tenses to get into their skin, to try and understand who they were before, what they've become, and where they'll evolve into, and to fold that into one package.
Video. You are fascinated by video. You sat down here, and as I'm watching this clip, you're watching the monitor.
Yes.
Because the high-tech stuff that are here at Bloomberg, you're obsessed by it. Do you take advantage of that as a director?
I think we're living in a time where I can have characters who are involved in doing exactly what I do as a film director. I mean, everyone is involved with chronicling their home experiences, the births of their kids, the
camcorders and all
everything.
that.
So why not? I make certain decisions as a director, and my characters make those same decisions. I mean, when they choose to record something or erase it or transplant it, I mean, it's become part of what it means to be human in our
and what it means to enhance memory.
Yes. What has memory become?
Right.
I mean, memory is a tool we have that can forget, and sometimes forgetting is something that is helpful. But when everything is recorded, and when those experiences can be accessed, I mean, I think that there are, that has to change our dramaturgy as well.
You know what else it does? I mean, it just offers, in the hands of someone who's just curious, because of the technology and its advancements, an incredible opportunity to record the visual, but also the spoken. I mean, and how many, the storytelling trends, storytelling phenomenon of every society, Armenians and Canadians and Egyptians and Americans, is enhanced by the capacity now to sit with people and just have them reflect their experience.
Right.
And it offers, I think, ways for parents and for grandparents, to, in a sense, continue to live in their experiences.
But there are perversions to that too. Like
I know. As soon as I said it, I knew you got to see your perversion coming up.
But there was I remember reading once in the New York Times about this incredible story of this man who wanted to let his son have a glimpse of what his childhood was like. So he went to his parents, who were now divorced, and had them recreate scenes of when they were together.
Yeah, but that's crazy.
Well, I think that type of action is not as crazy as one thinks. It's not that crazy.
To recreate scenes?
To recreate scenes, record them, and then to be able to show them to his son and say that these were his parents. I mean, I think...
And that's more powerful than just the memory of the spoken word.
We have come to a point where we want proof, we want evidence, we want to see images. That is our currency, and it is something that we are very... offhand about. I mean, the spoken word. I mean, and this is what's one of the interesting things about making this film is that you have a character like Ian Holm,
Yeah.
And what he's trying to do is to use the spoken word to seduce these people and to be the Pied Piper
and the quality of his voice and the
quality of his
resonance
voice.
and all
But
that.
ultimately, I'm also aware as a filmmaker that my greatest tool is image and how I frame and how I seduce through image. And that this community in this town is only able to absorb what it is they can imagine in terms of image, you know.
You and I may disagree over the power of narrative. I mean, not power of narrative in terms of storytelling, but the power of the voice within the visual experience.
Right.
I tend to believe it's stronger than maybe most. You don't even like narrative in your stories, do you? I mean, voiceover.
I found out how much I disliked it by something I did with my first draft. I had a ton of narrative, voiceover. The whole story was told through voiceover. We shot it that way. Yeah. But when we were editing it, I just found it gave away too much. Now, when it's well done, by people who are convinced about its use, it can be beautiful. Some of my favorite films are told through voiceover. I look at Taxi Driver, and I think that film is unimaginable without voiceover. But it's a matter of acknowledging what I believe and what I think I can do best. And since I don't think that, I think voiceover for my types of films would be too easy.
What I'm pleased about is you weren't worried or didn't concern yourself that the film might be, in somebody's judgment, too cerebral or too melancholy. You went with where your instincts were and where your instincts were and your heart.
I have to imagine that my viewer is infinitely curious.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to have you on this broadcast.
Oh, it's great.
Sweet Hereafter. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.